Perfect. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this panel discussion, which is on public financing for children to strengthen child-sensitive social protection systems. And it is a very vital, important topics as governments around the world face crunches in their domestic resources. The development partners and donor agencies are supporting the governments to identify additional resources to strengthen child-sensitive social protection. And hence, we are very excited to present the findings of the evaluation that we did in collaboration with UNICEF Evaluation Office headquarters. And to provide a brief overview of the evaluation and to moderate the panel, let me first introduce Mr. Denny Jobin. Denny possesses an impressive track record boasting over 25 years of invaluable expertise in program planning, monitoring, and evaluation at the country office level. His proficiency extends to performance management and performance audit, complemented by a profound understanding of both governmental and United Nations requirements. And since 2018, he has been serving as a senior evaluation specialist within the UNICEF Evaluation Office in New York, spearheading the equity portfolio of the 2022-25 strategic plan, with a sharp focus on UNICEF endeavors in social protection, urban development, and poverty reduction. And prior to this role, from 2010 onwards, he held the position of Chief of Monitoring and Evaluation and Field Coordination for UNICEF Nigeria. So, Denny, I want to welcome you to the panel as a moderator, and over to you.
Thank you, Anu, for the kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, distinguished participant and panelists. Thank you for joining us this morning for my time, or this afternoon, evening, your time, depending where you are. So I will give a short introduction to the panel, and then each panelist, if you allow me. So to follow up the introduction made by Anu, this panel is given the government decision on funding social protection policies play a pivotal role in shaping children's well-being and equitable development. The impact is far-reaching as insufficient allocation and poor utilization of existing limited resources contribute to reduce access to essential services for children, particularly the most vulnerable. Recognizing the importance of engaging in budget advocacy, UNICEF has supported data and evidence generation to advocate for greater and a better use of public investment in child-sensitive social protection systems. So this is what we're here about. So we have 4 panelists. First, let me introduce you. The co-chair is Ms. Anu Anna Iti. She's a senior researcher and capacity building coordinator at EPRI, Economic Policy Research Institute, based in Cape Town, South Africa. With a master in public policy from the London School of Economic and Political Science, she brings more than 5 years of expertise in public policy, specializing in qualitative research and capacity building program, and coordinate EPRI's research and knowledge management function. In her current role at EPRI, Anu serves as a team leader for the World Food Program CEPFAM project on food security and nutrition, and has coordinated evaluation for UNICEF Global Studies and leads EPRI flagship e-learning course, designing and implementing adaptive social protection system. Her extensive experience span regions like Asia, Africa, and Latin America, involving projects from ADB, AFDB, World Food Program, UNICEF. She specialized in the design, implementation, and evaluation of social protection policy, strategy, and program. Should I introduce each panelist before they start talking up? So over to my PowerPoint, please, if you can project rapidly.
So, Beverly, can you just...
So thank you. Next slide. So this webinar take place as a result of the global evaluation that was conducted between November 2022 and July 2023, focusing on the period of UNICEF support between 2018 and 2022. The key objective were the extent to which UNICEF has been relevant and effective in supporting government to mobilize resources, strengthening the capacity of government and their partner, developing, sustaining, or leverage country-level partnerships. So we're here for mainly as a result of the first objective. above, the overarching purpose of this global evaluation, which cover in-depth case study and 21 total data point other countries, was to contribute to the global evidence base on relevant and effective action by UNICEF and others that support the progressive expansion of child benefit, and to provide organizational direction to UNICEF and how best to shape intervention in this important area of work. Next slide. So rapidly, just to share with you key findings, the report is larger than this, but I just want to share some of the associated with the topic that of interest this morning. So a key evaluation question: as UNICEF effectively employ evidence and advocacy approach to mobilize resource and support government to mobilize domestic and international resource. We found that UNICEF was a strong advocate for child benefit, and their expansion in various countries, in many countries, leverage evidence and forming solid partnership with local institutions, academia, and to support its advocacy. There were essentially two factors that were very important that revealed to be very important: is the quality and the comprehensiveness of evidence used to inform the policy, and the nature of each country relationship with respect of their government and how they work and they partner. We also found that headquartered the global office have provide solid technical guidance and evidence to support and inform country office ceteris paribus. And as well, regional officers have been undertaking and hands-on approach to quality assistance and quality assurance to support country office as well. So there were a good complementary work done by the global and the regional office in support of country office. How effectively and innovatively as UNICEF explore alternative domestic and international source of revenue to finance universal child benefits. We found that there were UNICEF untapped opportunities to advance innovative financing options for the government, including risk financing and climate finance. Example of post-COVID recovery and climate change conference outcome that have opened opportunities for UNICEF to integrate climate. There's a shift in financing institution towards supporting social dimension of climate change that can be also an additional source. However, we found that more concrete initiative within the sample country needs to be taking shape. But these were opportunities that needs to be tapped in. Next slide, please. As UNICEF effectively employ evidence to advocacy approach to mobilize resource and support government to mobilize domestic and international resource. With a growing interest in innovative financing mechanisms, UNICEF country officers can work with government to identify additional domestic. We are going to hear this morning two good practices from South Africa and Argentina, and they will share their experience and see how they have done given the specific context. With international finance institution, UNICEF country office the evaluation showed that they were successful in mobilizing alternative resource and international resource with them. Last but not least, what more can be done? What support our approach will allow UNICEF, HQ, regional office, and country office to better mobilize resource and to better enable government to mobilize resource? Well, we've found that, and we believe that the work in the area of domestic financing by forging synergic partnership, expanding partnership with other international organizations, and particularly the financial institutions. This partnership can help in two ways: to strengthen UNICEF effort to advocate for domestic resource mobilization, and as well to consolidate the political commitment wherever it be to either establish or to expand child benefits as need be. Lastly, the one key recommendation in this area of work, and I will conclude here, is to leverage UNICEF expertise in public finance to internal capacity building initiative and continue to support government CSO on child sensitive budget and fiscal space expansion. So more where this evaluation has shown that we have done good work globally and with some good practice, and we need to pursue this agenda, consolidate the gain, and push it further in advance. For your information, this evaluation, the full report is available in the public domain right now and is going to be presented to the executive board in February 2024. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Denny. And I would be taking over and providing a brief overview on why public finance for children is important within social protection before we go into the good practice from South Africa and Argentina. So before I jump ahead, and while Beverly is pulling up the presentation, I just wanted to let all of you know that live interpretation is available, and you can enable it on the panel downstairs on the down of the screen, and live translation from English to Spanish and Spanish to English is available. And please let us know in the chat if you face any issue in accessing the interpretation. Great. So without further ado, let me kick off my presentation where we are looking at why is public finance for children very important within social protection. So on the next slide, what we see is that the rate of return on social protection when it is invested on children is much higher when compared to investment at a later stage in life. So investment in children are one of the most developmental investments government can make, which thereby ensures that there is strengthened inclusive social development and equitable economic growth in the long run. And that's why we see policymakers and governments increasingly investing in social protection plus components, especially for children. And this builds the political will, which is the foundation of public finance for children. If you go to the next slide, what we see is we are focusing specifically on child benefits, since that was the focus of our evaluation. And what we see is that child benefits has many direct and indirect impact at both the individual and at the household level. So with child benefits, what we see is that at the individual level, the spending increases, there is more savings available at the household level, and they are able to invest more in a healthy and equitable life for children. And what we see because of child benefit, the most important outcomes are improved health and education, health outcomes, nutrition outcomes, education outcomes, to name a few. And hence we see governments prioritizing child benefits and cash transfers for children all around the world. But on the next slide, with this increasing priority, what we see is that there is a gap in the financing that is available to invest in children. And after the pandemic, what we see is that in 2020, there was around 3.9 trillion financing gap to achieve the SDGs. And by 2025, what we see is that this gap is estimated to reach around 4.3 trillion per year from each year from 2020 to 2025. And hence this prioritizes the work in public financing for children. And that's what we have seen UNICEF do quite well all around the world in supporting the government in increasing domestic and international resources available to invest in child-sensitive social protection. On the next slide, what we see is that there is 4 core areas of activity UNICEF has worked on in this PF4C. The first one is evidence generation. The second one is engaging in the budget processes to influence government spending. Third, empowering citizens to hold the government accountable, increasing social accountability within budget cycles. And finally, helping the governments identify both domestic resources and facilitating government's access to that credit. And these are the 4 main areas of work. And as Denny had highlighted in his slides as well, the evaluation on the next slide, you will see that UNICEF has been successful in generating evidence through budget briefs and other evidence pieces in partnership with development partners, national and international research institutes to support governments in mobilizing domestic resources. And they have also been able to successfully engage with the media, the youth groups, and the community to increase the social accountability as well within the budget cycles. And these would be covered in the good practices that would be highlighted very shortly. But when we look ahead, we need to look at what what next and how can we increase the financing available and reduce the financing gap that exists currently and which is supposed to be increasing every year. And the first one is one of the most innovative and also exciting part is green and climate finance. And that is the new development finance that needs to be tapped in. And as Denny highlighted, it is very important for UNICEF to make the linkages between children and green financing as they build human and cognitive capital together. And it also helps in linking social protection to a just transition and green sustainable development. And as we go forward, we also need to ensure that the resources are working more effectively and efficiently for children and are also more results oriented, as highlighted in UNICEF's innovative financing for children strategy that was released in 2023. So over here, I would stop and I would hand it over to Denny to introduce the two best practices that would be highlighted and would be linking in to the innovative strategies. So over to you, Denny.
Thank you, Anu, colleague. So let me introduce the two next panelists. We'll start with Argentina as per the program. So hopefully I'm gonna get the name right. Sebastian Gray. So I don't know if I got it right, sorry. So Sebastian is an economist from the University of Buenos Aires with a specialization in economic development and also a PhD and a master's degree in economics from the Public University of Navarra. Since 2008, he has been the social inclusion and monitoring specialist at UNICEF Argentina. Sebastian has worked as consultant for the Ministry of Labor, Employment and Social Security at the Ministry of Economic of Argentina. He has also worked as a professor and researcher at several national and international universities and published numerous papers in specialized journals and on labor economy, social investment, and evaluation. Also, let me introduce you, Mr. Oscar Cedrangolo. He is an economist from the University of Buenos Aires and holds a master's degree on philosophy from the University of Sussex, IDS. He works as a teacher at the University of Buenos Aires and several other universities and was the head of the economic undergraduate course and the master's degree at the University of Buenos Aires. He was public policy specialist at CIPAL during the period comprised between 2001 and 2011 and undersecretary of relationship with provinces at the Ministry of Economy between 1999 and 2001, among other public office appointments. Oscar has published several papers on public policies. So over to you, dear colleague. I don't know which one starts first for Argentina. Oscar, I guess.
Yes. Thank you, Dennis. Muchas gracias. Voy a hablar en español. Muchísimas gracias por la invitación y participar en este seminario. Vamos a presentarles algunos de los trabajos que venimos haciendo con UNICEF. Nosotros desde la Universidad de Buenos Aires tenemos una tradición de colaborar con UNICEF en ciertos estudios sobre la protección social de la población infantil, y eso es lo que vamos a presentar rápidamente hoy. Por supuesto, la situación de Argentina es sumamente complicada en este momento, con lo cual es imposible no hablar de la situación de la población infantil sin dar un contexto sobre la situación macroeconómica y fiscal, en especial teniendo en cuenta que el objetivo de estas líneas de trabajo es ayudar en la programación presupuestaria y en la asistencia de la política pública en Argentina hacia este grupo de población. Entonces, rápidamente voy a mostrarle algunas imágenes que pueden verlas más tarde, pero un poco para indicar un poco el problema. Nosotros en Argentina ya tenemos más de una década de estancamiento. Ahí ven la caída en el producto per habitante desde el 2007, 2008 hasta ahora. Tenemos un proceso muy complicado y creciente de tasa de inflación, lo cual vamos a ver que influye mucho en la protección de la población infantil, teniendo en cuenta los problemas para mantener el valor real de los programas destinados a la protección social. Y como indicador tal vez más claro de estos problemas, tengan en cuenta que hoy la población que está bajo la línea de pobreza es cerca del 40%, pero en el caso de la población infantil y adolescente es del 57%, y en el caso especial de los adolescentes de 12 a 17 años es casi el 60%. Casi el 60% de la población adolescente vive en hogares pobres, y ahí en el gráfico van a ver que cerca de un 14% de la población infantil vive en situación de indigencia, con lo cual estamos frente a un problema de extrema gravedad, ¿cierto? Eh, el trabajo que venimos haciendo desde hace un tiempo en colaboración entre UNICEF y la Universidad de Buenos Aires es básicamente el seguimiento de las políticas de protección social para la población infantil. Nosotros tenemos en Argentina un programa que se llama Asignación Universal por Hijo, que es relativamente similar a programas de transferencia condicionada que existen en otros países del mundo, en especial en América Latina, donde hay una tradición bastante fuerte a lo largo de los últimos 10, 15 años, ¿no es cierto? Ese es el trabajo que estamos haciendo. No voy a profundizar en las características técnicas, pero simplemente dejo la filmina con información sobre el programa. El trabajo que venimos haciendo, en principio, esto en relación con la presentación que hizo Anu recién, estamos trabajando básicamente en las dos primeras acciones de identificación y generar, generar evidencia estadística, y luego tratar de ver y dar un seguimiento a la protección de la población infantil. Lo primero es tratar de detectar cuál es la población sin cobertura, o sea, población infantil que debiendo necesitar algún tipo de cobertura no la está recibiendo, pese a que el programa que se desarrolla en Argentina es universal. Entonces ahí lo que estamos trabajando y hemos trabajado es en el cruce entre información estadística, información presupuestaria, registros administrativos, para tratar de detectar básicamente por residuo cuál es la población que necesita cobertura y no la tiene. Y ese es el bloque rojo que tienen en ese cuadro. Es cerca de 1 millón de población infantil, casi el 10%, que no se encuentra una justificación por la cual no está recibiendo. Son muy pocos los casos que logramos identificar por qué, y claramente eso lo que marca es un desafío para las autoridades para ir profundizando el seguimiento, la búsqueda y la identificación de los hogares en donde hay población, niños y adolescentes en situación de necesidad. Por supuesto, este programa es un programa que no alcanza a, a, a sacar, a eliminar la pobreza de esta población. ¿Por qué? Porque se requiere de un apoyo mucho más sustantivo, teniendo en cuenta los problemas que existen. Un problema vinculado con la inflación es que, como tenemos una tasa de inflación creciente y muy elevada, hay problemas para la actualización de los montos que reciben estos hogares, y ahí lo que muestran es cómo va cayendo el valor real de la asignación. Ese es un problema sumamente grave que además genera un permanente conflicto político en términos de cómo se ajusta, pujas entre sectores y además frente a una restricción presupuestaria muy elevada, ¿cierto? Y ahí este es un gráfico bien interesante, aunque por supuesto requiere un tiempo para ser analizado, pero es la relación entre la asignación y el valor de las canastas, tanto básica como alimentaria. O sea, el 40% que ustedes ven ahí en el gráfico significa que el valor de la asignación es solamente el 40% de lo que requiere un hogar para salir de la pobreza, con lo cual solamente esta población puede salir de la pobreza si se encuentra con otros ingresos adicionales que lo coloca cerca de la línea de pobreza. Con lo cual, claramente esta es una situación insuficiente si no es acompañado por otro tipo de políticas más importantes. Entonces, un poco para terminar, y con el uso del tiempo asignado, digamos que es esencial para la política de protección social de la población infantil y adolescente el seguimiento de estas políticas, el brindar evidencia estadística sobre los problemas y, por supuesto, trabajar a partir de acá con el presupuesto, tratar de identificar las partidas y tratar de encontrar en dónde se puede discutir con las autoridades y los miembros de la sociedad civil para mejorar estas políticas. Bueno, hasta aquí llego y creo que Sebastián sigue con este tipo de temáticas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Oscar, for the
Sí,
presentation.
sure.
And over to you, Sebastian.
Yes, give me a second. I'm trying to share my presentation. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
No sé.
Is it on the chat as well, or can you and you will share it as well, no?
Sí,
Yeah,
sí,
I'll
sí.
share from
No,
the chat.
no, no.
Okay. Okay, I will continue also in Spanish. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Gracias, Denis, Anu, Michael, por los colegas de Nueva York y de EPRI, por su permanente apoyo. Y también es un placer compartir esta presentación con Russell, con Cristina y por supuesto con un gran amigo de la casa que es Oscar Cetrángulo. Y también permítanme, están acá presentes los colegas de UNICEF Argentina, Carolina Uricino, que está acá conmigo, Javier Curcio, Julia Frenkel, Alejandro Beccaria, que han estado permanentemente trabajando en estos temas. Yo muy brevemente quiero dar continuidad a estos planteos más estructurales que está señalando Oscar, que son muy relevantes, contando, yendo un paso atrás y contando qué es lo que venimos haciendo de UNICEF en Argentina, junto con otros actores, entre ellos la Universidad de Buenos Aires, para generar y para promover que Argentina cuente con una inversión suficiente y eficiente en materia de MIES, entre otros objetivos que tenemos en un outcome en el cual trabajamos que apunta a contribuir a la reducción de la pobreza y las desigualdades territoriales, que como bien señalaba Oscar, son muy relevantes y seguramente van a seguir siendo relevantes en los próximos años. En este slide creo que resumimos gran parte de lo que voy a contar ahora. Son dos situaciones. Primero, qué venimos haciendo y qué venimos haciendo en el proceso de labeling, de etiquetado del presupuesto, cómo esta información se la puede utilizar para hacer acciones de abogacía y algunos desafíos que tenemos hacia adelante. Entonces, el trabajo que venimos haciendo en PF4C en los últimos años es muy rico y ha tenido muchos hitos. Y uno puede, en la parte de arriba, uno ve el ciclo de formulación del presupuesto y esto nos ha generado, a través de la generación de evidencia, tener varios insumos que están basados en un etiquetado en un presupuesto transversal vinculado a las principales políticas que están destinadas a la niñez y adolescencia a partir de la Administración Nacional. Hoy este etiquetado, que abarca toda la Administración Nacional, de hecho está disponible en este Children Budget, Microsite en Open Budget, lo pueden buscar. Es una información utilizada por diferentes actores, incluso por actores del propio Parlamento, del propio Congreso Nacional. Desde el año 2019, el Ministerio de Economía genera estos reportes, quarterly reports, para monitorear el presupuesto destinado a la niñez. Y quizás lo más interesante en lógica de incidencia política es que por tercer año consecutivo, en el mensaje de ley de presupuesto que se envía, que el Poder Ejecutivo envía al Congreso, contamos con un capítulo transversal vinculado a la inversión destinada al NIES, entre otros transversales. También se incluye un transversal sobre género, medio ambiente, discapacidad, pero el de niñez ha sido el que metodológicamente ha abierto estas puertas para poder trabajar en este tipo de iniciativas. Me quiero centrar, a ver, generamos evidencia. Esta evidencia, de hecho, es la que utiliza la Universidad de Buenos Aires y otros actores para poder realizar estos análisis. Monitoreamos el presupuesto a través de este etiquetado, pero el foco tiene que ver en el uso. Y acá es donde yo me quiero centrar un poquito en esta, digamos, cómo estamos utilizando esta información. A ver, quiero encontrar un caso concreto. En 2023, cuando se presenta la ley de presupuesto, teníamos estos informes, teníamos el capítulo transversal, teníamos lo que se había enviado al Congreso y el análisis realizado por el equipo de UNICEF sobre la base de la información pública nos mostraba que había unos fuertes recortes, y fuertes recortes que gran parte de ellos tenían que ver con las políticas de protección de ingresos que estaba mencionando Oscar. Hicimos un análisis muy sólido, lo presentamos en el Congreso, fuimos a la Cámara de Diputados a los procesos deliberativos para mostrar algunas alarmas y algunas recomendaciones, pero esto estuvo asociado también con un fuerte impacto mediático, cómo trabajar, y esta es quizás una de las características que también describen el trabajo que venimos realizando en Argentina, es cómo a través de los medios de comunicación y el trabajo de incidencia política podemos generar demanda y agenda pública de cambios en algunos temas. Si se fijan algunos... digamos, este análisis, y de hecho ahí en esa foto está la representante de UNICEF, estoy yo, hay un colega, está Javier ahí también. Lo que hicimos fue presentar esta información. El Recorte es el principal diario, uno de los principales diarios de Argentina, y sobre la base de negociaciones políticas, incidencia, medios de comunicación y movilización social, lo que logramos fue efectivamente que haya una expansión de casi 700 millones en 2023, en el presupuesto 2023, y esto revirtió casi en su totalidad la reducción planteada. Entonces, creo que es relevante, digamos, Oscar planteaba un poco esta visión más macro y más de dificultades fiscales. Yo quería enfocarme en el proceso de etiquetado y en el proceso de trabajo con la Administración Nacional y las provincias, teniendo en cuenta también las características del federalismo en Argentina. Y planteo quizás algunos desafíos ya para cerrar esta parte que me toca a mí. Este es un ongoing effort. Esto va a continúa. Tenemos la información, tenemos los reportes. Sabemos que en un contexto altamente inflacionario, bueno, el objetivo es al menos amortiguar los efectos de esta aceleración inflacionaria en las partidas vinculadas a la niñez y la adolescencia. Y para esto seguimos apostando y entendemos que resulta clave, y en el equipo de UNICEF y junto con el Ministerio de Economía lo venimos trabajando, en poder seguir contando con más información, presupuesto abierto, que se pueda monitorear, que se pueda generar instancias de participación. El objetivo siempre es que, y más en un contexto de restricciones fiscales, poder promover que exista una mirada del presupuesto vinculada a la eficiencia, a la equidad, a la calidad, obviamente, y posicionando, y esto quizás es uno de los desafíos, y si uno quiere decir, bueno, ¿dónde está dónde tenemos que avanzar mucho más? Bueno, la niñez hoy no está presente en las decisiones de política macroeconómica. Entonces creo que este también es un punto también como para ponerlo un desafío más relevante. Y finalmente, y con esto cierro, y sé que además la oficina regional en LAC de UNICEF está trabajando y hay mucho interés en poder contar con estándares internacionales. ¿Sí? Sabemos que es muy difícil la comparación, que cada país puede tener metodologías específicas, pero creo que algún mecanismo que pueda generar algunas regularidades en metodológicas en esta información sumaría muchísimo y tenemos de casos de mucho éxito, digo, no solamente Argentina, sino muchos países de la región y de fuera de la región que vienen trabajando en P4C y que creo que contribuiría a este tipo de análisis. Me excedí 1 minuto y medio, les pido disculpas y muchas gracias.
Thank you, Sebastian, for the very rich and useful presentation. I think we're going to all the Q&A after the South Africa presentation. So let me turn over to our next country experience and good practice with first Mr. Russell Wilderman. Russell heads up the social policy and UNICEF at UNICEF South Africa. He has more than 20 years of active experience in the development of field, and his main interests are the public finance as well as quantitative education and poverty studies. Prior to joining UNICEF South Africa, he worked as the head of the economic governance program at IDASA in South Africa and did extensive cross-country work in East, Southern, and West Africa on applied budget work, school financing modalities in developing countries, small-scale farming, and governance and social accountability. To continue, before giving the floor to Russell, let me introduce Madam Christina Nomdo. Commissioner Christina Nomdo was appointed at the Western Cape Commissioner for Children for a 5-year term on June 1st, 2020. Her mandate is to promote and protect the rights, needs, and interests of children in the province. The Commissioner is an oversight mechanism for the Department of Education, Health and Social Development, as well as Cultural Affairs and Sport. Christina has worked professionally for over 30 years on issues affecting children's rights. Christina holds a master's degree from the University of Cape Town and a bachelor degree from the University of South Africa in library and information science, as well as the art, majoring in child psychology. Christina is a passionate about children's participation in governance. So welcome to our two next panelists, Russell first and Christina. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Denis. I hope you can hear me clearly. Is it okay after a while if I switch off my video because my link is a bit unstable? I sit in a very bad spot in the office. I don't know why specifically I'm struggling with connection. But let me start. I think, Denis, as you said, our public finance work and our poverty and inequality work, it basically goes hand in hand. We find it difficult to separate the two. But the first thing I'd like to speak about is the socioeconomic context in South Africa. And I would say that children are in a good position in South Africa, but they're also in a bad position. They're in a good position in the sense that a significant share of the government social wage is still devoted to children's programs, and the child support grant has reached more beneficiaries over time. So that's a fantastic achievement and one that we presently support the government to actually do better in. The bad part has been the South African government's commitment to cut expenditure over the last decade, and we think it has done lasting damage to children's programs and services and will need a longer period of stability to overcome such challenges. It's interesting from a poverty point of view that things haven't really changed that much. Now, the expectation was that in the aftermath of COVID-19 and the fact that the South African economy is growing so slowly, that the poverty dynamics would have been actually worse. But we've done an initial analysis of the General Household Survey, And we found poverty rates very comparable and similar to what was actually experienced in 2015, which is about 7-8 years ago. But we will wait for the publication of the income and expenditure survey to be absolutely sure that these findings are backed up. But we were quite pleasantly surprised because we were expecting a much, much higher level of poverty. And by way of numbers, you're talking about a 32% food poverty rate. You're talking about an upper bound poverty rate about 64%, based on the most recent work that we've done. Now, in terms of the design and implementation of the child support grant in South Africa, first point is that there's no conditionalities attached. The South African system does not require the recipient of a particular social grant to comply with a set number of conditions in terms of behavior. I mean, obviously, there are certain criteria for specifying who should be receiving the grant, but there's no conditionalities in terms of the use of the grant, etc. And sometimes it stimulates debates and discussions in the country, which in some instances are actually not well informed. Nonetheless, the grant value is about 510 South African rands per child per month. So that's about $23 per child per month. One of the conditions is that the primary caregiver has to be a South African citizen or a permanent resident or a refugee. And both the applicant and child must reside in the Republic of South Africa. From an age point of view, anyone between the ages of 0, birth, and 18 is covered. And of course, initially when it started out, it was limited to a particular age range, but this has been significantly bumped up, and that has brought more children into the funding net. There is a means test. So, for example, in 2023, the income threshold was 5,000. That's about 270 USD per child. 273 US dollars if you're a single caregiver, and about 546 USD for a married caregiver and a spouse. In other words, your joint income must be below 20 times the grant value of the child support grant. And of course, some of the new innovations in June last year, orphans in the care of family members became eligible for what we call a child support grant top-up. It's approximately $13 additionally per child per month, bringing the total child support grant amount up to about 40, the top-up grant to about $40 US, which is above the food poverty line, which is good news. And as a result of this particular innovation, the grant is expected, as the Children's Institute's report suggested, to reach more than 700,000 poorer children over the next three years. Let me just quickly speak about the financing challenges. And I'm going to use a little bit of public finance speak, but I will clarify. So the financing challenges in South Africa is not about what we call the extensive margins in public finance. In other words, the state at this point in time is providing sufficiently for all children to be covered at the existing cost of the grant. The challenge is really about the intensive margins. In other words, raising the monetary value of the child grant such that it meets an external benchmark, for example, the food poverty line. That's been the big issue. So there are two issues. The one is raising the grant up to the level of the food poverty line, and of course, making sure that every single child that qualifies to receive the grant should be receiving the grant because there's enough money in the budget. Doesn't require a new financing proposal, expansion. The money is simply sitting in the budget, which means that we are returning money to the National Treasury. I would go as far as to suggest that universalization by itself will not present formidable financing challenges at the existing level of the child support grant, given the large percentage of children who are already covered by the child support grant. In terms of the analysis we just completed, which we will publish next year, close to 70% of children between the ages of 0 and 17 are covered and are receiving a child support grant. And if you sit in the 3 poorest quintiles, then you're looking at participation rates way above 80%. So it's indeed one of the best targeted grants, not just in South Africa, but in the world. And of course, Denis and colleagues, as you will know, work is now being done to respond to a UNICEF child support grant exclusion report, actually done by our colleagues in EPRI. We are now working with the Department of Social Development, with the South African Social Security Agency, and potentially the Department of Home Affairs will be involved with UNICEF in planning and executing a campaign to get excluded children into the child support grant net. This is going to be a very important part of the follow-up to the work that we've done with EPRI around social protection, and of course, Denis, with you in terms of the evaluation. Just a couple of lessons learned. So it's best to understand social policy in South Africa as a fairly small unit. And so the first question would be, how do you make an impact in a country that has an established university setup, that has a very good, capable national treasury? What's the most cost-effective way of engaging budgets? Because obviously we want to engage budgets so that children's socioeconomic rights and their human rights can be realized. And so one way in which we've decided to do this was to engage the National Parliament, the National Assembly. The key thing that came out of all of this is that when you do make a submission to the National Parliament, your message must be crafted in such a way that the ask is clear, that it's executable, and that it's actionable. Otherwise, you can put fairly complicated proposals before National Parliament, but they wouldn't know what to do with it. So what we did was to focus on an issue around expenditure arrears. You know, this idea that in this particular financial year, we were supposed to pay a couple of small to medium-term businesses, but we didn't because of some pressures in other parts of the budget. And then what we do is we postpone paying those companies, and this postponement leads to an accumulation of arrears, which from a planning point of view, from a sustainability and predictability point of view, is bad for children's programs. Because on an annual basis, those particular line departments must make arbitrary decisions about what share of the budget, which was meant to go to children, will actually be shaved off and actually paid over to service providers that you should have paid long before. And so this is clearly a big issue. So our recommendation to the Appropriations Committee was to ask the committee to press the National Treasury on the matter, and for them to come up with sustainable solutions to reduce the quantity and the magnitude of expenditure arrears. Now, by law in South Africa, if a committee accepts your recommendation, if a public hearing is held, and your recommendation is accepted by the committee and written into a committee report, then National Treasury by law must in the next budget explicitly and in writing respond to what it is going to do about this particular recommendation. So this is the key part. And even more importantly would be for UNICEF, and this is what we've actually done, after the recommendation was accepted, after National Treasury had responded in the budget review, was to actually go to National Treasury and inquire as a follow-up, how well are you doing in terms of responding to a recommendation that we've sponsored and which was accepted by this committee? And what the National Treasury did was to put together a 9 provincial, to find 9 focal persons in the 9 different provinces, and to explain in each of the key line departments, basic education, social development, and health, what they are doing to reduce the expenditure arrears. The main line of attack under these circumstances was actually to inject new money, new cash into these budgets, in particular the health budget, because the health budget is also kind of struggling with what we call medical legal claims. In other words, I go into a hospital, I need to do an operation, let's say, for example, on getting my hearing sorted out, but I come out of the hospital with my leg cut off, and that will lead to legal challenges. And if the legal challenges are successful, it means departments must actually pay out money to the person who's been affected. So just to conclude on the crux of our intervention strategy, one is that you must do budget analysis and similar type of analyses right throughout the year. You cannot just do it in a once-off manner. You need to build a brand identity around the fact that you do public finance work. Because as Bob, who's on the call, will actually explain to you, it's difficult to convince national treasuries that UNICEF can do decent and sustainable public finance work. So when you say you want to do public finance work for children, then there's a bit of a qualification. So you need to do this work all around and engage with both line departments and with the National Treasury. 2, National Parliament is an effective ally if you understand how to approach the institution and craft recommendations that do not require more work from the legislators to understand, to interpret, or to take forward the recommendations that you are put forward. And as I said, the recommendations must be realistic and it must be actionable. And then finally, you must close the loop by engaging with National Treasury and line departments to see the progress and monitoring the impact of your recommendation. So for example, we didn't only engage National Treasury after the fact, but we also do some field visits where we go to provincial departments of health, social development and basic education and say to them, we've raised this issue on your behalf at the highest levels. It's got a response at the highest levels. Can you please explain to us how you are being affected and how the solutions are affecting you? And of course, we're documenting that in next year, early next year, we'll be publishing, some of these results in terms of the follow-up process. Denis, let me stop here. I hope I didn't go more than 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. That is one question for you, but we're gonna pose it now. We're gonna go to last but not least panelist, Madame Christina. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Denis, Anu, and fellow panelists for having me on. Yeah, I feel like a bit of a fish out of water. I don't have an economics degree. Can I qualify to be part of the debate? That's for my own amusement, because often I am surrounded by economists when talking about public budgets, but I take it from a whole different angle. I think Russell invited me here for novelty value, and I'll explain why. I am the Children's Commissioner in one province in South Africa. And according to our research, we have only found one other children's commissioner in the whole of the African continent, in Mauritius. So I am the second children's commissioner in the African continent. And it's quite special. So I always feel like a bit of a novelty. My mandate is that I can receive complaints and inquiries from the public about social sector spending and government work in relation to children's rights. And that I can do research and I can advocate, raise awareness, I can lobby, I can advise government and make recommendations. That's my strongest stick. I can advise and recommend. I can't make them do anything. But my favorite part of my mandate is that I must work with children. And I think that's why they decided to work with me. I call myself a child whisperer because I understand them and they understand me. They think I'm crazy, Christina, and that's what I truly am. I've been working with Russell for more than 2 decades on public budgets and children's rights. He's taught me a lot about how to do the economic side of things. And I teach him a little bit about how to talk with children and how to get their views included in these debates. So this year, or maybe let's say in my term now, I started in 2020 with children. On the first day that I started in my office, there were children who worked alongside me. And they really do, they run the show actually. They're not just figuratively my bosses, they're literally my bosses. My PA and chief volunteer, 17-year-old V, is my office organizer. So they come along with us operationally, but more importantly, they come along with us from an advocacy perspective, because it's only them who are the experts in their own lives. And so I learn from them about their lived reality. And then I try to translate this into the big adult world speak and the systems of governance. And we try to make changes within how governance is organized in our country. Bob, he mentioned again, he's a hero for us here, will be not surprised to hear that I'm beating the same drum about child participation in governance for 30 years now. We have worked with Russell to explain to children about the budget how the budget works. Fortunately for Russell, he's an economics high school teacher, so he has a good vibe about him and he can speak normal speak and not just economics. And we exchange by getting some good technical information from him where we must make a submission. Because we don't make a submission in a very flimsy way to Parliament or to the United Nations or the AU. We do it in a very rigorous way. And so we require evidence. And Russell provides us with some of that data that we require for our submissions that we do to these institutions. And so we have also taught Russell a little bit, I think, about child safeguarding, how to work with children responsibly and how to be authentic in relation to bringing their voice across. And so we have also, I use him as a sounding board for advocacy strategies in the country, because we are quite attuned to what's happening in the governance milieu. But it's not an easy task. It's not just a matter of gathering children from the street and then asking them how they feel and then working with them to write a submission. For public finance training, for governance training, we've now calculated it took us 1.5 years to build the capacity of children from 12 years and up to be able to speak substantively and confidently about child rights budget advocacy. And they have been fantastic. They've in person represented their views at the United Nations, at the African Union, at the South African Development Community. But more importantly, they've represented their views personally in their own government system. So when I approached National Parliament and I said, I'm going to do an input with children on your medium-term budget policy statement, they were alarmed to see that Tara, 14 years old, was the first presenter. And for them, it is a novelty, but what Tara brought to the table was quite substantive. She told them, you need to prioritize children in the budget. In your national policy statement, we did not see the word children once, which for us tells us you are not prioritizing. This is not a child-centered budget. It's also not a child-friendly budget because there's a whole lot of economics terms in it. She spoke to them about cautioning about cutting social spending and also about introducing a higher rate of value-added tax, which is a broad-based tax, which the children mentioned, even they pay when they buy sweets. So children are taxpayers and they don't want taxes to be raised in our country. John Lee then did a follow-up in the second meeting with the National Parliament, and he, of his own accord, put on the table the sufficiency of the child support grant. He said to me, Tina, I feel passionately about this issue. Can I put it on their table? And I said, go ahead, guy. You have the platform. You say what you need to say. And they were quite alarmed that John Lee understood the inflation rate, the measure of the grant, the amount, who gets it, and what he believes should be sufficient allocation in relation to the food poverty line. So it's not easy to train children to do this type of budget talking. But once they get it, and they are given the platform and the equality also to be able to express themselves in their own way, they feel quite confident. Next, we went to our provincial parliament and we looked at the Division of Revenue Amendments Bill. And Vambai, who I spoke about earlier, 17 years old, she was overjoyed. She found the word child 22 times. Unfortunately, when she understood the context of the word child, it was in relation to budget cuts of children's programs. And so she was very upset, and she told the government that she's quite upset and that she doesn't approve this amendments bill. And our province must please not approve that amendments bill that was put on the table by the national government, because it's disadvantaging children and cutting things like early childhood development and many other school infrastructure grants were also cut, conditional grants to children. And so we took it a bit further because we like to be a little bit maverick in our country. You can see me, I'm quite weird and wacky. And, you know, there was no space for us to critique our medium-term budget policy statement on a provincial level. So because I built a relationship with those in Parliament, the power brokers, I invited the head of the Finance Committee of Parliament in the Western Cape to come and listen to a presentation by 10 children critiquing their budget policy statement. And they do quite well in covering things like the green economy. They worry about if child health is not prioritized. These are one of the issues. But they could see a lot of commitment. They felt that the budget was a bit child-centered, futures-oriented, outcomes-oriented. So in closing, I think that I want to leave this statement on the table. The children said to me, why does government look at the world through an economics lens? Why must we look at economic review and outlook as the main framing document for our public finance system and our development context? Simply, the children want us to profile child happiness as the main outcome for our budget process and governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. This was a very rich and very interesting presentation. 4 panelists that we've listened to, country context different. Few questions already in the chat. I don't know if they're in the chat. So let's go to the Q&As. Please do invite all participants to put their question into the chat. I know you will help me to manage that, please. I've seen a few questions. Let me pick it up. Where are they? Yes. Okay. One question was for Sebastian, I think. How did you, I would like to ask, how did you manage to persuade the Ministry of Finance to share the detailed data? That is one from Sebastian. Let me go to the Russell one. Then after that, Sebastian can go. In South Africa, could you please expand on what approach I've worked on involving, I guess what UNICEF approach has worked on involving civil society in fiscal dialogue, advocacy with the Treasury and Parliament? What are the advantages of engaging with CSOs? So 2 questions, over to you, Sebastian.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Sinem, for your question. And please, I have here my colleagues connected. If you want them to complement the answer, please feel free to do this. I think it's a very good question. The progress in this process is aligned with a budget transparency agenda. The Ministry of Economy is actively working to expand transparency, accountability, and in this regard, our role, I mean, UNICEF was to advocate for a focus on childhood. The inclusion of this particular focus on childhood was facilitated by a long-standing cooperation between UNICEF and the Ministry of Economy, and emphasizing the sustainability of our efforts and building trust, which is very, very important. And also, on the other hand, it's a very, very time-consuming process. We understand that it is crucial as a lesson learned to maintain these actions in the medium term, to begin seeing results, to continue seeing results. Summarizing, I think that I highlight 2 good practices. At least one, that we have the open data that you can share, and we can share the information, and you can monitor, and this is very relevant. And additionally, I would stress the importance of this incredible in-house technical capacity that we have at UNICEF to effectively communicate with the Ministry of Economy. not only people from the social inclusion team, but also from communications. And I think that the technical capacity and the advocacy efforts that we have at UNICEF Argentina is something that must be considered as a key relevant input to achieve results. But please, Caro or colleagues, do you want to add something, please? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Over to you, Russell, for your question.
Thanks, Denis, and thanks so much to Anna for the question. I'm just looking at the question. So I think from a context point of view, what helps us to do the work in South Africa is that South Africa has a very dynamic context. Civil society organizations are robust, participate actively in the budget process, but more importantly, we have a constitution that has made socioeconomic rights justiciable. And there's been quite a lot of litigation on the extent to which the South African government has been able to implement and promote socioeconomic rights. So what we do on an annual basis is that we, as part of my work plan, I sit together with civil society organizations. We ask, what are the key capacity development needs, not just for them, but also for us? Do we have the capacity in-house? And what's the best way to procure that particular capacity? Sometimes it's done by me, sometimes it's done by somebody within the core group, somebody it's done by a professional in the private sector. But the idea is that we have this capacity development program that we follow through consistently over a number of years. Like, for example, next year, we're going to work on the public costing for government services. We found somebody to introduce this particular topic to the group of civil society organizations that we work with. From an approach point of view, we are trying to get civil society to talk to the government. We have a privileged position. We can talk to the government anytime. And so when we have these public roundtable conversations, we try to be on, what's the word? To be a backbencher and to let civil society speak directly to government. So we've succeeded in doing a roundtable every year with the National Treasury, asking them to come and explain to civil society, what's the framework? What were the key decisions? Is there flexibility in that framework to be a bit more progressive from a spending point of view? But we then say to civil society to bring National Treasury before you and to sustain these relationships, please, it must be done in a civil and constructive way. If you start screaming at each other, you're not going to get National Treasury to come to a public event. Remember, it's a public event, so it's recorded, it's being televised, it's being looked at, etc., etc. So I think in that way, there's been a consistent relationship between getting National Treasury to come before us. This year, they didn't want to do it because of the extent of the budget framework they put forward. There's one government, the government that Ms. Nomdu, the Children's Commission is working for, they have decided to take the national government to task about the allocation of resources because they feel that the allocation of resources will be detrimental, will be negative for the implementation of children's rights within the Western Cape. And if they don't get a satisfactory answer, they may actually take this issue to the courts. So that's a very interesting development. And of course, as you know, next year we have elections in South Africa. And if South Africa were to become more fragmented, in other words, political party coalitions, then advocacy for children's rights and advocacy for children's budgets and advocacy for children's social protection will become even more complicated because of the lack of cohesiveness within government. So watch the space. It's going to be quite interesting. But as I just want to say to Anna, it's a fundamental part of the work that we do. I cannot do my work successfully in South Africa without working with civil society. If I work exclusively with the government of South Africa, I will have only fulfilled my obligations 50% of the time. Thanks, Denis. Back to you.
Thank you, Yusuf, for the very comprehensive answer. I see another question. I know you helped me, but I think it's for Argentina and Country Offices. Based on your experience disseminating the budget analysis with the media, how do you assess the balance between grassroots media advocacy and high-level engagement with Ministry of Economy? What are the best practice or lesson learned? I don't know who, Oscar or Sebastian who want to take over? Could be
Uh,
Spanish too. Yeah.
Okay, Carol, do you want I will take advantage that Carol is here, and she has a great and incredible experience working on advocacy issues and media. So, Carol, the floor is yours.
Bueno, gracias. I will go in Spanish. And just a quick note, Christina, also here a non-economist surrounded by economists. So, and my added value, I think it's on advocacy issues, so I will take this question. En Argentina tenemos una estrategia bastante amplia de articulación en estos dos niveles, en lo que tiene que ver con abogacía con medios y abogacía de alto nivel con el Ministerio de Economía. Me parece que hay un punto en ese balance y de lecciones aprendidas tiene que ver con algo que también mencionaba Sebastián en la respuesta anterior. Hay una estrategia de construcción de confianza con el Ministerio de Economía que se sostiene en el nivel de mandos técnicos, pero que también va generando una confianza con las autoridades. Entonces, ahí hay un trabajo de ir generando una articulación y un trabajo técnico con el Ministerio de Economía que también ayuda al momento de salir a los medios públicos y hacer estas estrategias de abogacía más amplias, en el sentido de no generar rispideces con el ministerio. Es un balance muy finito, y a veces tenemos, digo, es ir navegando esas tensiones. Salir con medios públicos, como hicimos en el debate de 2022, tiene la ventaja de que uno pone los temas en agenda y claramente logra una mayor visibilidad, y eso logró empujar el debate de niñez, por ejemplo, en la Cámara de Diputados, porque fue un tema que tuvo mucha repercusión en medios, entonces es como que mueve el debate de la opinión pública a la Cámara de Diputados y pone cierta presión en el buen sentido de tener que tratar estos temas. Y me parece que ahí es una estrategia que no está exenta de tensiones, que no siempre sale súper bien, pero digo que creemos que lo venimos navegando, de ir manteniendo este trabajo a nivel técnico, este diálogo permanente con las autoridades, donde hay una estrategia de cooperación y donde no es que nosotros salimos a los medios y el ministerio no sabe lo que estamos haciendo o queda desconectado, ¿no? Hay un tema de ir trabajando con el ministerio y eso nos ayuda a navegar ciertas rispideces. No sé si ahí también Oscar, desde una mirada también un poco más externa a UNICEF, quiere también aportar algo sobre este tema. Gracias.
Sí, gracias, Carolina. Sí, en realidad hay una sumatoria de esfuerzos en donde también, obviamente, participa la academia, digamos, una gran cantidad de expertos trabajando sobre estos temas, que a su vez tienen mucha participación en los medios, no solo nosotros que estamos trabajando con ustedes, sino en general es una problemática muy habitual en nuestro país, tanto por la protección social de la población infantil como por cuestiones más macro asociadas a esta, ¿cierto? Un tema no menor en nuestro caso, que creo que va siendo una problemática bastante similar en otros países de América Latina, no sé en el resto del mundo, es el impacto que tienen las recurrentes crisis, sobre todo vinculadas con el sistema previsional, sobre las rigideces presupuestarias y cómo cada gobierno tiene que ir balanceando sus presupuestos entre los distintos grupos etarios. Creo que ese es un tema que hay que prestar muchísima atención y, por supuesto, las demandas que existen del lado de las crisis económicas que impactan fuertemente. Seguramente el episodio de la pandemia por COVID y la salida de ese episodio ha generado un cambio en las rutinas de debate y seguramente ahí también tanto el rol de los medios como de la academia ha influido en cambiar un poco el eje sobre esas discusiones, pero un poco lo cierto es que estamos en medio de esas definiciones y hay que esperar un poco que se asiente el terreno para ver cómo quedamos parados, pero sin duda hay que continuar los esfuerzos. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Oscar. it seemed that very important to work with the academic and the civil society in both contexts. A last question for you, Russell, then I will hand over to Michael to close. Please, 1 minute, if you can keep it short. You see it in the chat, right? So I can read it quick. Russell, well, public interest litigation seems to be a significant and effective tool for advocacy in South Africa, especially as on constitutional matter. As you rightly said, the constitution is justiciable in South Africa. However, can you share any other advocacy strategy for country where court order are not easily enforced against government agencies? Over to you rapidly. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis, and Beverly, thank you for the question. I'll be quick. Beverly, yes, I think even in the South African context, there is sometimes a reluctance to actually enforce a constitutional provision or constitutional judgment, which was delivered by the highest, the apex court, the constitutional court. So I think the consensus in South Africa now is that you don't just take a particular case to court. You build awareness, you work within networks, you do all the necessary political and policy mobilization. You speak to government, because I think everybody's realized in South Africa, although the courts are available for litigation, it is a counterproductive strategy every single time something happens to run to a court situation. So I think what we are doing now is to build consensus, first of all, on an issue and use all the normal advocacy tools, media work, podcast, roundtables, engaging directly with government, et cetera, et cetera. And then when people make the calculation that the response has not been satisfactory, let's say over a number of years, then I think the possibility for litigation exists. So I just wanted to sort of bring to your attention, it's not as easy as just going to court in the South African context. I wish I had more time, but let me stop there, Denis. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. You did well. It was a speedy, but good. Thank you. So I'll just share with you the link of the global report of UNICEF, this evaluation with the 4 case study. So Argentina and obviously South Africa. Over to Michael. I think Michael was able to join us. So Michael, if you want to give...
I've been on the whole time, unfortunately, from an airport, so none is able to jump in. But I want to thank the panelists and you, Denis, for moderating. This has been an excellent and insightful webinar. And I want to highlight from the Children's Commissioner, who we're really honored to have participating, that she's only the second of 2 in Africa after Mauritius. And it's not a coincidence that Mauritius has the highest spending as a % of gross domestic product on social protection in the continent, and South Africa is second. And even though panelists have identified, and by the way, Argentina is similarly a fiscal commitment leader in Latin America, investing in children drives the investment returns that supports the political will that enables governments to commit more and more resources. And even though the panelists have very rightfully identified the growing fiscal constraints and the bottlenecks and the setbacks, we want to still recognize the enormous commitment South Africa still demonstrates, particularly through the child support grant and other grants for children. And both South Africa and Mauritius, by the way, and Argentina have highlighted, have harnessed the power of universalism to drive and support this political will. But I think even more importantly, the evidence that the government of South Africa has repeatedly mobilized, often supported by UNICEF, to demonstrate the productive potential that the human capital and cognitive capital that investing in children supports drives the wealth of nations. It enables the continued success towards greater and greater prosperity. And that's an old argument. Social protection is an investment, but South Africa and Argentina, and by the way, Mauritius as the fiscal leader in the continent, have consistently harnessed this evidence and demonstrated to government officials and politicians and the public how productive investing in children is, and in particular, universal social protection. But there is on the horizon a third wave of social protection, and we heard from Denis and we heard from Anu about this, that investing in children by building this cognitive and human capital enables a smarter nation. And we saw during COVID how important technology was. Social protection driving inclusive digital technologies provides the social dimension of an integrated climate development and equity strategy that supports a just transition to green and sustainable development. And also importantly, opens the door to green finance. Climate finance is the new development finance. It's the only place in the whole development spectrum where public finance commitments are growing. And demonstrating this link to investing in children and its vital importance for a smart economy, which is almost always a green economy, is so vital for continuing to expand this fiscal space for children. Thank you, everyone. It's been great to have you all as part of this webinar. We're honored to see such a great turnout. And again, to Denis, to Anu, to Russell, to all the panelists, I'll turn back to Anu and Denis for a proper vote of thanks.
Thank you. I think we're reaching the end. We're 5 minutes over time. So I want to thank everybody. We had, I think, at the peak, we're 85 participants across both regions. And yes, I would like to highlight the point that Michael just made. The climate financing is growing, and it's something that we want to look in the next year in the coming evaluation on adaptive social protection, and to see adaptive to climate as well, climate change. So this is something of interest for UNICEF. I would like to close the webinar here. I've shared again the link to the web in the chat of the report. It's going to be presented to the board. It's our public information, UNICEF board in February. I don't have the date exactly, but if you go to UNICEF website board, you will see when it is scheduled, and it's open to public. So this evaluation will be presented with the recommendation and management response. So on these nice words, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Oscar, Sebastian, Russell, and Christina, and everybody else. Anu, obviously, and Michael. I don't want to forget. If I start naming, I'm going to forget. So gracias. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.